Mark, the neighbor who watched me sleep. Mark lived next door to me in a quiet suburban apartment complex, and when I first moved in, I thought he was just a friendly neighbor. He was polite, always greeting me in the hallway with a smile, sometimes stopping for casual chit-chat about the weather, building maintenance, or the latest neighborhood gossip. At first, I welcomed his friendliness. It's always comforting to have someone around in a new place, but in hindsight, that friendliness was the first red flag I ignored. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. Mark's presence was barely noticeable during the day, and I would occasionally see him in the hallway or coming home with groceries. But then subtle oddities began to appear. Small things seemed slightly off. A book I'd left on the coffee table would be in a slightly different position, a kitchen towel folded differently, a pen not where I remembered leaving it. At first, I chalked it up to my own absent-mindedness. I live alone, after all, and sometimes I forget things. But as the days passed, I noticed these occurrences were happening more frequently and in increasingly strange ways. Then came the nights when I would wake up with an eerie feeling that someone was watching me. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia. After all, I was living alone, in a new environment, and my imagination could easily play tricks on me. But the sensation didn't fade. It was a cold, suffocating awareness, like invisible eyes burning into me from the darkness. I would check the locks, ensure all the windows were shut, and sometimes even glance toward Mark's apartment. Nothing seemed out of place, but the unease persisted. The situation escalated one late night when I returned from work around midnight. Mark's apartment light was on. I didn't think much of it initially, people stay up late after all, but something compelled me to look toward his windows. That's when I saw him. Mark was standing very still, staring directly at my apartment window. My heart raced, and my stomach sank. The friendly neighbor I had trusted had transformed into someone entirely different. I immediately drew my blinds and avoided him for days, but the dread lingered. Soon after, I noticed more direct signs of intrusion. Items that I hadn't moved were slightly displaced. Personal belongings like my notebooks and phone chargers appeared in different spots. Mail I hadn't yet opened seemed shifted. The small, subtle invasions made me feel increasingly unsafe in my own home. My first instinct was to set up a small security camera facing my window, hoping to catch whoever or whatever was causing this. The footage revealed the horrifying truth. Mark had been watching me through my window consistently for weeks. He wasn't just peeking occasionally, he was studying my daily routine, moving only when I adjusted my position, turning on a light, or went in and out of view. Each frame of video confirmed what my instincts had been warning me all along. Mark's friendliness had been a disguise. He had meticulously violated my privacy, observing every movement I made in my own apartment. I decided to handle the situation cautiously. I reached out to a few other neighbors, and to my surprise, discovered that Mark had a long history of intrusive behavior. People spoke of him lingering in hallways, staring into other apartments, or asking unusually personal questions. No one had reported him to the authorities because his behavior hadn't escalated to direct harm yet. The pattern, however, was unmistakable. Eventually, I contacted the police and shared my video evidence. They took the situation seriously and explained the laws regarding harassment and stalking. They encouraged me to file a formal complaint, which I did. The authorities increased patrols around the complex and advised me to document any future incidents. I also upgraded my home security with additional cameras and motion sensors on my windows. Mark's behavior began escalating after he realized I was aware. He started leaving small, strange items near my door, handwritten notes, little gifts, and even some belongings of mine that had gone missing. It became clear he knew I was watching him back. I reported each incident, and the building management eventually helped secure a restraining order. After multiple complaints, Mark was finally removed from the complex, but the psychological impact of his intrusion remained long after he left. Living through this experience taught me a sobering lesson. Danger often hides behind ordinary appearances. Mark had seemed perfectly normal, friendly, polite, helpful, but beneath that exterior, he was a predator who had violated my personal space in ways I could not have anticipated. The incident reshaped how I think about privacy, trust, and boundaries. I now take precautions I never considered before, even in what seems like a safe neighborhood. Even today, years later, I remain vigilant. My windows are always covered, my security systems active, and I carefully monitor who I let into my home. The memory of Mark watching me through my windows is a reminder that horror is not always in haunted houses or abandoned buildings. Sometimes it lurks right next door, hidden behind a friendly smile. Lesson learned: always trust your instincts. Be cautious about seemingly harmless people who overstep boundaries. Maintain your privacy and never ignore the subtle signs of intrusion. Friendly gestures can mask dangerous intentions, and sometimes the real horror is closer than you think. The Johnson house that hid dark secrets. When I first moved to Maplewood Street, the Johnson house immediately caught my attention. It was a large, old Victorian-style home, painted in a faded cream color with dark green shutters, unlike the other houses in the neighborhood, which were modern and well-kept. The Johnson house looked like it had been frozen in time. Its paint was peeling in some areas, the garden was overgrown, and the windows were perpetually shut. Most of the neighbors whispered about it, but avoided going too close. Even though I had just moved in, I felt a strange pull toward the house. There was something about it that screamed story, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what. The house was supposedly vacant. Neighbors claim Mr. and Mrs. Johnson had moved out years ago, leaving the property in the hands of a distant relative who lived elsewhere. Sometimes people reported seeing lights flickering inside, even though the home was supposed to be empty. I didn't pay much attention at first. People loved to gossip, but a few months after settling in, I noticed things that made my blood run cold. It started with the sounds. At night, as I tried to sleep, I occasionally heard faint noises coming from the Johnson house. The sound of shuffling footsteps, creaking floorboards, or the occasional muffled thump. I rationalized it may be a raccoon or stray cat, but the noises became more frequent. Some nights it sounded as if someone were pacing, moving back and forth across the wooden floors in the old house. It wasn't random. It had a rhythm, a pattern, as though someone was deliberately moving around. Then came the sightings. My friends and I were sitting on my porch one evening when I noticed a shadow moving across one of the upper windows. It was a quick movement, but enough to make my stomach tighten. When I mentioned it to my neighbors, their reactions confirmed my fears. A few admitted they had seen figures inside, fleeting glimpses of someone looking out at the street, even though the house was officially empty. Some had seen what looked like furniture being moved in odd arrangements, or glimpsed doors opening and closing by themselves. Curiosity got the better of me. One afternoon, I decided to explore the perimeter of the Johnson property. The garden was wild, overrun with weeds and tangled vines. I pushed through the undergrowth and reached the side of the house. That's when I noticed the basement window was slightly ajar and a faint light flickered inside. My heart pounded in my chest. I had always considered myself brave, but the idea of entering the Johnson house, an abandoned, possibly haunted home, was terrifying. Still, the flickering light suggested that the house wasn't completely empty. Someone, or something, was in there. I decided to investigate further, cautiously. The following evening, I approached the house under the cover of darkness. I stayed near the perimeter, trying to catch a glimpse of anything unusual. That's when I heard a voice, a whisper, almost too faint to recognize. It sounded like someone talking, but it wasn't a friendly conversation. It was tense, urgent, almost like an argument. I strained to listen, trying to understand the words, but all I could hear was fragmented sentences. The voice seemed to move from one room to another, as if someone was pacing or searching for something. The situation escalated when I met my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who had lived on the street for over 40 years. Over tea one afternoon, I asked her about the Johnson house. Her face went pale, and she lowered her voice. "You don't want to go inside," she said. "That house, it's full of dark secrets. The family that lived there, they weren't ordinary people." She went on to explain that the Johnsons had a long history of strange occurrences. Several neighbors had reported hearing arguments, screaming, and unexplained sounds late at night over the years. Even the police had been called. Once. But by the time they arrived, the house was silent, as if nothing had ever happened. Despite her warnings, my curiosity persisted. One night, I decided to approach the front porch and peek inside through a dusty window. The sight that greeted me made me freeze in place. The living room was immaculate, almost unnaturally so, as if it had been preserved for decades. Furniture that should have been worn with age looked pristine. More disturbing were the walls covered with hundreds of photographs, some faded, some recent, depicting people in unusual poses. Many of them were neighbors, some unknown, all staring directly at the camera, with expressions that were difficult to read. It was as if the house itself had been keeping records of everyone who had ever lived nearby. I took a step back, nearly tripping over a root in the garden. Suddenly, a shadow moved in the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but the figure vanished. My heart raced, and I realized I had to leave before someone or something noticed me. But the images in the window stayed in my mind. The house wasn't abandoned, it was alive, observing, and possibly recording. Over the next few weeks, the occurrences became more sinister. Items in my own home began to disappear and reappear in strange places, similar to the reports I had read online from former neighbors. I would hear footsteps outside my door at night, or soft whispers in the hallway. I started keeping a journal of events, documenting every strange sighting and sound. The pattern became clear. The house seemed to have a presence that extended beyond its walls. Eventually, I decided to do some research. I dug into property records, old newspaper articles, and police reports. The story I uncovered was chilling. The Johnson family had been involved in a series of unexplained deaths and disappearances, spanning decades. Officially, most were chalked up to accidents or misadventures, but locals whispered of ritualistic activities, secret rooms, and people vanishing without a trace. The house had been passed down through the family, and even after they moved, rumors persisted of someone or something continuing their work within its walls. One night, I couldn't resist the urge to get closer. Armed with a flashlight, I circled the house and discovered a hidden door near the back, partially obscured by vines. The lock was old and rusted, almost as if it hadn't been used in decades, yet it swung open easily. Inside was a narrow staircase descending into a pitch-black basement. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to leave, but curiosity drove me onward. As I descended, the air grew cold and heavy. The faint flickering of candlelight revealed walls covered with more photographs and handwritten notes. Names, dates, locations, some I recognized, others I didn't. It was a catalog of people, meticulously recorded over decades. Then I heard a soft shuffle behind me. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand, but the basement was empty. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I stumbled back upstairs and fled the property, vowing never to return. I knew then that the Johnson house was not just a building, it was a living entity, guarding its secrets, and possibly harboring a presence that was far from human. After that night, I moved out. I couldn't stay near a place that made me feel constantly observed and unsafe. The Johnson house still stands on Maplewood Street, silent and imposing, a constant reminder of the dark secrets it hides. Neighbors still whisper about lights flickering, shadows moving, and unexplained noises, but no one dares enter. Even the police avoid it, citing decades of unresolved incidents. Looking back, the experience taught me a lesson about curiosity, fear, and the unknown. Sometimes danger isn't obvious. Sometimes it hides behind the appearance of an ordinary home, behind closed doors and shuttered windows. And sometimes the most terrifying secrets aren't just stories, they are very real, very close, and very dark. Lesson learned. Be cautious of places that seem abandoned or insignificant. Some homes hold histories that are better left undisturbed, and curiosity, while natural, can lead to encounters with truths far darker than you imagined. The Johnson house isn't just a haunted building, it's a warning. Sarah, the neighbor who turned violent overnight. I'll never forget the first time I met Sarah. She moved into the apartment across the hall from mine in a quiet urban complex, carrying boxes and a friendly smile. At first, she seemed like the ideal neighbor, polite, cheerful, and eager to make friends. We exchanged small talk in the hallway and occasionally waved to each other in passing. I thought it was a relief to have someone so approachable next door, especially since living alone in a city apartment can feel isolating. But as I would come to learn, appearances can be dangerously deceptive. For the first few months, Sarah seemed completely normal. She kept to herself mostly, although she was always quick to greet neighbors or offer a helping hand if someone struggled with groceries. I even helped her carry a box or two during her move-in. Occasionally, she would invite a neighbor over for coffee or a chat, and she always seemed polite and well-mannered. Looking back, all of these moments were the calm before the storm. The first sign that something was off happened one evening around 11 p.m. I was returning home from work when I heard raised voices from Sarah's apartment. At first, I thought she was just arguing with a friend or a roommate, but the tone was sharp, aggressive, almost unhinged. I paused outside her door, trying to make out what was happening, but all I could hear were angry shouts and sudden bangs against the walls. By the time I reached my apartment, everything was quiet again, as if nothing had happened. I didn't think much of it, assuming everyone has bad days. The incidents escalated quickly. Within a week, Sarah's behavior had completely changed. She would slam doors, yell at thin air, and at times, pound on her walls late at night. One night, I was awakened by the sound of shattering glass. I looked out my peephole and saw Sarah standing in her living room, throwing objects across the room in a fit of rage. It was frightening, but I didn't feel it was my place to interfere after all. She was in her own apartment. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was going through something. Maybe she had a mental health issue, and she needed space. But it got worse. The aggression began spilling into the hallway. I would encounter her screaming at people for no apparent reason, or aggressively gesturing at neighbors over minor disputes. Packages were ripped from doorsteps. Stairwells were blocked by her belongings, and she became increasingly unpredictable. Neighbors began avoiding the hallways when she was around. I realized this was no longer just unusual behavior, it was dangerous. Then came the night that terrified me most. I was returning from a late shift at work when I found Sarah in the hallway yelling at another neighbor over a minor misunderstanding about noise. Her anger escalated quickly, and before anyone could intervene, she shoved the neighbor against the wall. I was frozen in place, unsure whether to step in. My instinct screamed at me to call the police, but I hesitated, worried about escalating the situation. That hesitation might have been a mistake. The neighbor managed to escape without serious injury, but the incident shook me to my core. After that night, I decided it was no longer safe to ignore her behavior. I contacted the building management and filed a formal complaint, detailing all of her aggressive actions and incidents that had occurred over the past few weeks. They assured me they would address the issue, but in the meantime, the tension in the building grew unbearable. Residents were afraid to walk past her door, and the once friendly community had become a place of anxiety and fear. Sarah's actions reached a breaking point when she confronted me directly. One evening, I was coming home from the grocery store when she suddenly appeared in the hallway, blocking my path. Her face was red, her eyes wild, and she began shouting at me about something trivial, a package she claimed I had taken, even though I hadn't. I tried to reason with her calmly, backing up slowly, but she lunged toward me, attempting to grab my arm. My adrenaline surged, and I managed to push past her and rush inside my apartment, locking the door behind me. I realized then that Sarah's violence was no longer isolated incidents. It was a direct threat to anyone around her. I called the police and filed a detailed report, explaining her sudden aggression and the previous encounters. The authorities took the complaint seriously. They sent officers to her apartment multiple times and advised the building management to consider eviction proceedings if her behavior continued. The next few weeks were tense. Sarah's outbursts didn't stop, but the presence of law enforcement and formal complaints seemed to make her slightly more cautious. However, I continued to live in fear. Every time I heard loud banging or shouting, my heart would race. I was hyper-aware of every noise, every shadow in the hallway. Simple acts like taking out the trash or getting the mail became anxiety-inducing experiences. Eventually, the building management initiated formal eviction proceedings against Sarah. She was served with multiple warnings and required to attend a hearing regarding her behavior. I and several other neighbors provided statements detailing her violent actions, her harassment, and the overall impact on the safety and well-being of the residents. After the legal process was complete, Sarah was removed from the building. It was a relief, but the emotional toll remained. Living through this experience taught me how quickly a person can change, and how dangerous it can be when violence escalates unchecked. Sarah had seemed like a normal, friendly neighbor at first, but something triggered a rapid transformation into someone capable of aggression and intimidation. It was a stark reminder that appearances can be deceptive, and that vigilance is crucial when it comes to personal safety. Even after she was gone, the impact lingered. I found myself double-checking locks, avoiding interactions with new neighbors until I felt safe, and watching the hallways with a heightened sense of awareness. The incident also forced me to reflect on the importance of reporting dangerous behavior immediately. Had I delayed even longer, or ignored the signs, the outcome could have been much worse. Lesson learned. People can change in ways you never expect. Be cautious, trust your instincts, and never hesitate to take action if you feel threatened. Violence often escalates gradually, and early intervention can prevent far more serious consequences. Even friendly neighbors can hide dangerous tendencies, and living alone in an apartment complex requires vigilance and preparedness. And that's it for today's chilling tales of neighbors you don't want to meet. If you enjoyed these true stories and want to hear more spine-tingling experiences, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Don't miss out on the next horror story, waiting just around the corner, right in someone's neighborhood. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.